Ineffa, Fractured Halo, and Flame Forged Insight, 3 new additions for this upcoming patch. Let's just hop right in, starting with the new character, Ineffa. Ineffa is the Electro-Charged focused support. She is able to shield her allies, buff them with elemental mastery, deal damage from off-field, and amplify the Electro-Charged reaction to deal better single target damage, have damage that stacks on itself, and she enables it to crit. Her skill and burst are much like Fischl's, as they each deal damage and then summon her pet robot that will deal AoE electro damage to nearby enemies once per 2 seconds. This bot has a 2/3 chance to generate a particle every time it attacks, giving it an average particle generation of 1/3 less than 7 per rotation. Her skill and burst might be similar in this way, but they each have a major use case. Her skill summons a shield scaling on her attack, while her burst is an offensive nuke. Her passive allows her to change the Electro-Charged reaction to be Lunar-Charged instead, while also buffing its base damage based on her attack, capping at 14% at 2000 attack. Another allows her bot to deal an extra instance of damage to enemies when a thundercloud from Lunar-Charged is active, and this damage also counts as Lunar-Charged damage. Her final passive will buff her and the current active party member's elemental mastery by 6% of Ineffa's attack. Lunar-Charged is the new reaction that Ineffa brings to the table that replaces Electro-Charged while she is in a team. While present, when any ally applies Hydro and Electro to an enemy, a medium-sized thundercloud will spawn above them. I think this cloud has a 4-second duration if not refreshed, but that is not confirmed yet. This cloud will periodically deal electro damage to enemies beneath it when they are afflicted with both Hydro and Electro. The damage dealt is based on the elemental mastery, crit rate, and crit damage of all party members that contributed to applying the Electro and Hydro elements. Party members that deal less damage with the Lunar-Charged reaction will have their portion of reactionary damage reduced. The formula for this reaction is on screen now. If this is confusing, let me quickly walk through an example of how this works. In this example, Aoife has 900 EM and a 50-100 crit ratio, while Ineffa has 150 EM and an 80-160 crit ratio, and Overrun has 700 EM and a 60-120 crit ratio. If we put each of these into each formula, we notice that Ineffa gets the highest number, followed by Overrun, who's not far behind, and then Aoife. So we take Ineffa's entire output, since she has the highest, add it to half of Overrun's, since he has the second highest, and add that to a 1/12 of Aoife's, since he has a 3rd highest. In the end, we get our final average output for this reaction, which ends up dealing similar damage to Hyperbloom. The difference here is that this reaction relies on 2 or more party members having an elemental mastery stat of over 100, which is thankfully not too much. After that point, crit scales much harder with Lunar-Charged, which is apparent by Ineffa having a higher output compared to Overrun, while essentially only investing into crit. So essentially, after you reach 100 elemental mastery, each crit substat is about equal in value to 2 elemental mastery substats. But now with the new reaction out of the way, let's continue on with Ineffa and what she brings to the table. Ineffa is an all-around off-field character. Her damage is very strong all around, even when not considering Lunar-Charged. When in her best teams, I am seeing that she is getting a 4.7 at the lowest to a 9.5 at the highest on my damage rating scale. This is pretty ridiculous, especially for a unit that is supposed to excel as a defensive support. In this role, Ineffa can offer a pretty decently sized shield. Unfortunately, it does not seem to be that strong, as it tends to lag behind some of the other best in the game. If we compare it to the same units I compared to Dahlia last patch, she tends to be on the weaker end, even behind the likes of Dahlia's max shield capacity. Only when we're in Tenacity of the Millilith do we see that her shield is comparable to others, as without it, it is much weaker. So if you want to use her as a defensive support, then you have to use Tenacity of the Millilith. It's just too good for her, as it massively boosts her shield and allows her to buff her team a bit more. Speaking of buffs, her elemental mastery buff is tied to her burst, and will usually grant herself and the on-field party member about 150 extra elemental mastery. Considering that you don't even need to hard build into attack to get this large of a buff, it's incredibly powerful, especially for enabling a unit to scale well with her Lunar-Charged without building into any EM. All around, her kit is very good. Damage is strong, shield is strong as long as she uses tenacity, and she offers a pretty strong buff that lets all main DPS as well as herself utilize her new reaction without building into any elemental mastery. But how does she hold up to what came before? Let's start with her brand new reaction. Lunar-Charged and Electro-Charged are essentially 2 completely different reactions. Electro-Charged can be triggered multiple times in rapid succession as long as Hydro is applied to the enemy, and it bounces between enemies to deal damage. This reaction scales only off of elemental mastery, and the trigger for this reaction is constantly changing between units with high and low elemental mastery stats. Lunar-Charged is a reaction that scales with elemental mastery and crit stats, and it's triggered passively over time as long as enemies have Hydro and Electro applied to them. This damage is single target focused, but if there are multiple enemies enemies under a cloud, then Lunar-Charged will deal damage to all of them. Because of the way this reaction is calculated, its damage tends to be more consistent, as the characters with the highest output will always deal most of the reaction's damage. However, the crit factor is a bane as much as it is a boon, since the reaction takes into account every participant's chance to crit. This means that you could potentially quadruple crit the reaction, or you just can't crit the reaction at all, leading to a highly variable outcome. I came up with an entire chart thing explaining it, but that will take too long, so just note that Lunar-Charged is generally better because it is more consistent. Its variance is only based on crit, while Electro-Charged has to deal with varying elemental mastery amounts, which leads it to an overall lower output. I did mention before that Ineffa's damage is incredibly strong, so let's compare her damage output to that of the current best Electro sub-DPS in the game, Fischl. When it comes to their personal damage, Fischl wins against a single target every time, because her single target damage is just that strong. She's always been known for this. However, Ineffa has lots of AoE damage, while Fischl has none, which leads Ineffa to be able to outperform Fischl when against multiple enemies. That is, except in aggravate teams, where Fischl's lack of elemental ICD on most of her insanely fast attacks allows her to beat out Ineffa once again. However, Ineffa offers more than just damage. As she comes with a pretty large elemental mastery buff, she increases the consistency and potency of Electro-Charged. When looking at team damage, Ineffa dominates Fischl by 11% on average. Ineffa performs better in her niche 100% of the time. Fischl can keep up with Ineffa, but only in catalyzed compositions. Even then, Ineffa beats her out there too when it comes to AoE damage. Considering Fischl is the best Electro sub-DPS in the game, Ineffa's ability to completely remove her from the equation is disgusting, especially since she's supposed to be a tank, I think. This somewhat makes her similar to Kuki, another supposed defensive support tied to a niche that also acts as a sub-DPS. If we compare Ineffa to Kuki in her Hyperbloom niche, Kuki wins by about 25% overall. She can offer a similar buff using the instructor set, which would buff 2 other party members, her heals, and Hyperbloom damage. But the real reason she comes out on top is that she attacks much faster than Ineffa does. However, in practice, I expect them to perform much closer to one another, since Ineffa has longer uptimes on her application and elemental mastery buff, while also being much safer since her shield is stronger than Kuki's healing. The final character I want to compare Ineffa to is Beidou, since Beidou is another Electro sub-DPS with a shield that works very well in Electro-Charged teams. In my comparison, Ineffa is just a better Beidou. Ineffa is about 30% better than Beidou against a single target and about 6% better against multiple targets. This makes Ineffa about 18% better than Beidou is when using her in Electro-Charged teams. Beidou also has a bunch of other unfortunate downsides too. She has an insane energy cost on her burst, which makes her harder to build and use. She has a significantly weaker shield, even when we consider the damage mitigation she offers, as it only ends up being about half as good as Ineffa's if Ineffa is not using tenacity, and if Beidou is only built with HP, Beidou's damage can only be accessed by dealing damage with normal or charged attacks, and her damage has an upper limit of 5 enemies. So you can think of Ineffa as a more consistent and reliable version of Beidou, while also acting as a true defensive support, not a pseudo-defensive one. While I have yet to compare them to each other in aggravate teams, I am almost positive that Ineffa can be considered as Beidou power creep. It's almost a guarantee at this point. Overall, in my opinion, Ineffa is in a very bad state. She is a complete DPS upgrade to other units in Electro-Charged teams, and with the benefit that she can protect the team. She is also the only real Electro shielder available currently, which is insane considering it took Hoyo 5 years to do this, while releasing the same Pyro main DPS in nearly every region. This aspect, plus her off-field damage application and elemental mastery buff, end up making her very powerful when used in compositions other than her primary one. With her introduction, Ineffa also comes with the benefit that taser teams now have a heavy vertical investment ceiling, since constellations and weapons can offer more crit to characters, and therefore Lunar-Charged. However, she is missing the units with these vertical investment upgrades and just these units in general. Instead, she has to rely on already overpowered comps to be good, or else she is best used completely carrying the ball and chain units that are tied to her niche. She also is not the best defensive support, even when built as one, as her shield is kind of underwhelming. In order for her to serve decently well in this role, she needs to be used with tenacity of the Millilith, else she can't tank hits from endgame bosses very well. With all this in mind, I feel like Ineffa is a horrendous addition to the game that does way too much for no reason. While I think it is good that she excels in a niche, she ends up being so absurdly strong that she can carry this niche by herself while still being a powerful asset to all Electro teams in the game, since she has nothing holding her back from being used by them. So I would like to see some major nerfs to her, which would prevent her from being too versatile. First, nerf her personal damage by up to 50%, then make the elemental mastery buff buff she gives the on-field unit half of what she receives. The former nerf would make her less powerful in comps other than her signature ones, while the Elemental Mastery nerf would reduce her potential power in Hyperbloom and Vape teams. Yes, you heard that right. Vape teams. How exciting. Ineffa just offers so much damage for a defensive support that I honestly hope they gut her. Scofier and Seat Lale were so strong because of their defensive utility, plus disgusting buffing potential and DPS. We don't need another random support that power creeps Archons. This is just getting ridiculous at this point. Rant aside, let's dive into the new weapons, starting with her signature. Fractured Halo offers an average base attack and crit damage substat. Additionally, when an elemental skill or elemental burst is used, the equipping character's attack is increased by 24% for 20 seconds. If the equipping character creates a shield while this effect is active, nearby party members will be enhanced, dealing 40% more lunar charge damage for 20 seconds. This weapon is honestly pretty strong overall. It offers great attack stats plus crit damage, but the passive is the most specific one in the game yet, making it impossible for any character other than Ineffa to use effectively. It is very similar to Lumadu's Elegy overall, as it grants the same stat lineup, but Halo offers 9% more attack for most characters. However, Lumadu's passive doesn't require Emily, like Halo requires Ineffa, just burning, making it potentially better depending on the team. However, if we just consider their base stats, then let's compare this new option with Lumadu's and Staff of Homa, another polearm that offers a similar stat lineup. For this comparison, we're using the polearm user with the highest base attack, which is Xiao, as he would make the most use out of that extra 9% attack. Even with Xiao, Fractured Halo beats out Lumadu's and Staff of Homa without the extra attack buff by only about 2%, like the milk. Lowering the base attack appears to not have much impact on this relationship too, so I can assume that this will hold up quite well throughout most characters. However, if the passive for Staff of Homa is ever activated, which might occur more in this potential shield meta we might be receiving, then Homa would just be the better option. So, if anything, just consider Fractured Halo to be equal to Staff of Homa without its passive on everyone other than Ineffa for obvious reasons. And now let's end off the video with the final weapon being released, Flame-Forged Insight. This claymore offers an average base attack and elemental mastery substat. Its passive states that after Electro-Charged, Lunar-Charged, or Bloom is triggered, restore 24 elemental energy and increase elemental mastery by 120 for 15 seconds. This effect can be triggered once every 15 seconds and can be triggered even when the equipping character is off-field, very reminiscent of the Mailed Flower. The good base attack, 285 elemental mastery, and 24 energy make this claymore good for burst-hungry elemental mastery scalers. The issue is that these don't exist. The only characters that would ever want to use this weapon are Dori, Beidou, and Xiao, but they can only ever use it in Hyperbloom or Taser-related teams. Even then, of these units, Dori and Xiao both need to worry more about supporting themselves and the team using Favonia's Greatsword. Beidou could benefit from this technically, but it's mostly for the burst cost reduction. Even when considering that, it doesn't hold a candle to the Mailed Flower, which offers better stats even in aggravate teams. I've seen suggestions of it being good on Kave, but Kave is not an elemental mastery scaling unit. I've made that mistake too in the past too, don't worry. But Kave normally is not the one triggering Bloom damage, which is why it is better to run him as a normal DPS, even in his Bloom focused teams. In this case, he deals more damage using Mailed Flower, Favonia's Greatsword, and Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword, all of which being pretty free to play friendly. This claymore is just not good right now, but it does appear to be made for a Hydra character that has yet to be released, since it caters to Electro-Charged and Bloom. With that in mind, it seems like it is supposed to be a future investment rather than one in the present. But that's all I have to say about the new additions coming to Genshin. What do you think of the new toys we get to play with? Do you plan to pull for Ineffa? Who do you want to put the new claymore on? Are you hoping to snag Fractured Halo? Tell me what you think down below. But with that, I will get out of your hair. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!